New Year's mornings have a strange atmosphere in Buenos Aires. Fireworks still echo in the distance. The air smells like gunpowder and champagne, and whole neighborhoods sleep through the holiday with their curtains drawn. But in the Ayala home that January 1st, the silence had weight, an unnatural, clinical stillness that made the walls feel as though they were listening. By midday, concern turned into dread. 20 minutes of unanswered knocks at her bedroom door, her phone ringing on the other side of a wall. No footsteps, no voice. Finally, her father, Carlos Juan, forced the lock and stepped inside. On the bed lay 30-year-old Anabilia Ayala, motionless. But what froze Carlos was not her stillness. It was the object positioned just beside the headboard, a tablet mounted onto a small tripod, lens aimed with meticulous precision at the pillow. The screen glowed faintly, transmitting to somewhere else. Someone had been watching. Someone had seen everything. Carlos shouted for Cecilia and tried to rouse his daughter, while relatives dialed for help. For a few surreal minutes, the scene was split between two realities: a family fighting to revive their daughter, and a digital audience receiving the same image in real time. The stream didn't cut, it didn't stutter. It simply continued, cold and indifferent, as though the device had become the main witness in a story no one had yet realized they were part of. When detectives arrived, they ruled out forced entry almost immediately. No broken locks, no prints, no overturned dresser drawers or empty safes, nothing stolen, no sign of an intruder, only surveillance, the tripod, the tablet, the perfect viewing angle. The shot captured both the bed and the only door. Whoever had set it up understood exactly what they wanted to see and what they wanted to control. Forensics traced the live camera feed to a remote account, and that's when a name surfaced like a shark fin in a still lake: Junior Benitez, a professional footballer, a man who had played across Europe, Mexico, and South America. In public, he was the charismatic athlete with endorsements and headlines. In the Ayala household, he would become something far more sinister: a digital warden. While investigators still crowded around the bedroom, relatives of the footballer received voice notes from him directly. His tone was steady, unsettlingly calm. He described what he had seen on the screen. He recounted details only someone watching in real time could have known. He showed neither confusion nor shock, only certainty. That certainty would soon mutate into the backbone of the prosecution's theory: that he wasn't a passive witness, but a director. That the device in that bedroom was less a tablet and more a command center. What detectives didn't yet know was that this story did not begin on New Year's Eve. It began years earlier, in 2018, when Anabilia was 24, and everything in her life looked clean and promising. She lived with her parents in Almirante Brown, a quiet district at the edge of Buenos Aires. She was studious, disciplined, 2 university degrees, deep into research work, the kind of young woman who organized her notes by color and kept her books stacked like architecture. Her father, Carlos, adored her, not the casual affection of a parent, but that proud, protective warmth found in families who work hard for every opportunity. To relatives, she was thoughtful, gentle, almost too polite to interrupt a conversation. Then Junior appeared. He was 27, fresh off a European contract, newly signed to Boca Juniors, famous enough to be recognized at airports, young enough to still chase bigger dreams abroad. For a family like the Ayalas, his arrival felt impressive, at least on paper. He had the status, the money, the confidence. And in a country where footballers are stitched into the culture like saints and sinners, fame carries a certain gravitational field. Their early relationship looked ordinary from the outside, but isolation never begins with a cage. It begins with small, quiet adjustments: less laughter in common spaces, more time spent at someone else's apartment, excuses to avoid social gatherings. Anabilia grew withdrawn. Carlos noticed it instantly, as fathers tend to. When he asked what was wrong, she brushed him off. "I'm an adult, I can handle it." He let the conversation end there, unaware that she was already beginning to hide bruises beneath long sleeves and thick makeup. The turning point arrived silently in 2019 when Junior signed with Atlético San Luis and invited her to move to Mexico. She went. No family, no safety net, just 2 passports, a suitcase, and the unspoken hope that love could justify the distance. Mexico became the part of the story most people struggle to hear. Inside that apartment, Junior stripped away the tools of independence one by one: her phone, her laptop, her bank cards, her passport. Even the little wallet cash she carried for taxis and groceries disappeared. Without transportation or identification, a simple walk outside became impossible. Without money or documents, returning to Argentina became unthinkable. While Junior traveled for matches, she was locked inside the residence for days at a time. In some testimonies, days without food. In others, burns. In all versions, control. Meanwhile, her parents in Buenos Aires kept calling and kept hearing nothing. When they finally reached Junior, he dismissed them. Her phone wasn't working. Stop interrupting training. Don't call again. The isolation might have continued indefinitely if not for an improbable intervention. A stranger named Henrique. During an escape attempt, her second, he found her shaken and wandering a street in San Luis Potosí. He listened, he believed her, he paid for a hotel room, he helped her contact her family, then he bought her time, just enough of it for her father to purchase the flight that would bring her home. At the airport, Junior arrived too late to stop her. She passed through the security barrier as he shouted her name, and for the first time in months, a wall existed between them that he couldn't cross with charm or threats or fists. When she stepped off the plane in Buenos Aires, her parents documented injuries quietly and methodically, as if gathering evidence for a future they feared might come. What they didn't know was that Junior wasn't finished, not with her, not with them, and not with the idea that control could be maintained from a distance, because captivity doesn't always need a locked apartment. Sometimes it only needs a screen. Freedom didn't last long. After a brief stretch at home, with family meals and doctor visits and a fragile sense of normalcy, Junior reappeared, this time apologizing, promising change, burying the past beneath tears and flowers, and the familiar pitch of remorse that so often haunts abusive dynamics. Against the advice of relatives, against her father's intuition, and against the quiet terror still flickering in her posture, Annabilia agreed to see him again. This time, the journey led to Ecuador, where Junior signed with Delphine Sporting Club, a new city, a new team, a new chance to recalibrate. But geography doesn't rewrite patterns, it amplifies them. Alone again, without family or anchors, the same tactics re-emerged. The control, the isolation, the monitoring, the punishment when questions surfaced. By the end of 2019, she finally severed the relationship and returned alone to Buenos Aires. That door closed, but the one between obsession and violence stayed open. Back in Almirante Brown, the pandemic arrived, roads emptied, borders froze, curfews swept across the country like rolling tides. In that environment, separation did not protect her. It trapped her inside the territory of her own fear. It was then that Junior executed a different form of control, one that required neither passports nor keys, digital presence. He moved into a house barely blocks from the Ayalas. First he drove past the windows, then he called, lightly at first, as if checking in, asking about her health, greeting her parents on video chats. Carlos tolerated it. Remote contact, after all, seemed better than physical intrusion. But Junior wasn't calling to talk. He was establishing surveillance. 1 hour a day became 3. 3 became entire afternoons. Entire afternoons became evenings where the tablet remained open at the dinner table, as though an uninvited guest had obtained permanent seating. Then came the device. A compact tablet, new and expensive, a gift, he said. But gifts in these dynamics are rarely kind gestures. They are tools, instruments, pieces of a thesis on power. The rule was simple. It had to stay on at all times. The camera never closed, the battery never ran out. At night, it was positioned facing her bed. During the day, it tracked her movement between kitchen, living room, bathroom, and backyard. If the Wi-Fi dropped, Junior appeared at the gate. If someone visited, he demanded they step into frame to identify themselves. If a relative lingered too close, a shrill alarm blasted from the speakers until the intruder retreated. What the family initially interpreted as eccentricity quickly hardened into captivity. She wasn't allowed to speak freely. She wasn't allowed to text or call friends. Even conversations with her own parents were filtered through the knowledge that he was listening. The Ayala home became less a home and more a monitored facility, its architecture repurposed for the quiet enforcement of domination. Carlos considered smashing the device more than once, but Junior anticipated the thought and neutralized it with one sentence. "If you run, I will find you. I have money. I have people." The threat wasn't shouted. It didn't need volume. It was delivered calmly, like an airline announcement, the kind that doesn't ask for panic because the panic is already implied. By 2021, digital control evolved into physical aggression. One night, while the Ayalas slept, Junior forced entry. He rifled through Annabilia's computer, deleting messages, resetting drives, sterilizing her digital life of anything that didn't belong to him. When her parents returned and found the state she was in, something in the household snapped. They filed their first police report. The report did not save them. It escalated him. Junior began visiting the house at 3 in the morning, always at that same hour, as though the repetition were part of the ritual. On one visit, he pulled a firearm and threatened to shoot the parents for interfering. On another, he slashed the family car tires and made Annabilia follow him inside, where he struck Carlos hard enough to fracture the orbital bone around his eye. The blow permanently damaged his vision, a trauma he'd carry long after the legal case began. The assault generated another criminal case and, finally, a restraining order. Junior was placed under house arrest. It might have ended the story right there, if not for a single, disastrous judicial assumption. Because of his fame, because he was a public figure, a judge deemed electronic monitoring unnecessary. No GPS bracelet, no supervision, just a piece of paper declaring he must remain 1,000 feet away. Junior treated that distance like a suggestion. House arrest became nightclub arrest, training arrest, party arrest. Witnesses documented him at events across the city, drinking, celebrating, posing for pictures with fans. Meanwhile, security cameras at the Ayala residence captured his truck lingering outside at night, headlights off, engine rumbling. The family filed 5 violation complaints. Nothing happened. No heightened sanctions, no custody, no intervention. When systems designed to protect fail quietly, predators operate loudly. Junior used that failure as proof of his invincibility. He told her that judges and police were decoration. Status was the real law. Money was the real leash. By December 2023, the surveillance system tightened into something total. At Christmas, relatives arrived for dinner, trying to reclaim some normality. Junior joined via the tablet, not as a guest, but as a gatekeeper. He demanded identities, asked names, asked how long each visitor planned to stay. When her cousins entered the room, he forbade her from engaging. She obeyed, retreating to her bedroom, tablet angled toward her face like an interrogation lamp. She spent the holiday under watch while her family toasted in the living room a few feet away. That was the moment Carlos realized presence alone could no longer protect his daughter. He was struggling against an opponent he couldn't physically remove, a threat that seeped through screens, through cables, through walls. On December 30th, Junior came in person. Security footage caught the vehicle. It captured Annabilia exiting the passenger side and walking back to the house. Afterward, she struggled to breathe. Her chest hurt, her energy drained. She told her parents it would pass. They assumed she meant the anxiety. They assumed wrong. New Year's Eve arrived and the family gathered once more. When midnight approached, they knocked on her door to invite her for the toast. No answer. They assumed she was complying with yet another of Junior's rules. So they stepped away, glasses raised, unaware that behind that thin wooden door, a 5-year nightmare had reached its final act, and that someone else was watching it unfold. Not from across town, but from the screen of a tablet mounted on a tripod. Nothing in the house made a sound. From the living room, they called her name again. In her bedroom, the camera captured everything. And on the other side of that connection, Junior said nothing at all. Midnight came with laughter, clinking glasses, and the muted fireworks of Buenos Aires suburbs. To the Ayala family, New Year's Eve was a fragile return to normal, at least for a few hours. They believed their daughter was simply avoiding conflict, following another of Junior's countless restrictions. Stay in your room, keep the tablet on, don't speak to anyone he hasn't approved. They didn't know that this time, it wasn't a rule. It was an ultimatum. Forensic reconstruction would later show how methodical the scene inside that bedroom had become. The tablet sat on the tripod aimed toward the bed, its angle calculated, its lens clear, its microphone live. Junior's face was on the other end, silent but present. According to investigators, he issued the final order with the calm certainty of someone who believed he controlled not just a person, but the outcome of the night itself. End your life now, or I will break into the house and hurt your parents. It was the kind of threat that only works on someone who still loves the people in the next room. Someone who has been conditioned to take every threat as literal and every deadline as real. Someone who has spent years believing that resisting would only transfer the suffering onto those they are trying to protect. Annabilia fit all three. The forensic timeline, recreated from cloud data, video logs, and family noise captured through the tablet's microphone, mapped the final minutes with chilling clarity. While her parents and relatives prepared the toast in the living room, she positioned herself near the tripod. No shouting, no argument, no visible hesitation. Through the device, Junior listened to her parents call out her name. He didn't warn them, didn't call emergency services, didn't break the connection. The call continued uninterrupted as she hanged herself inside her childhood bedroom. By the time Carlos forced open the door hours later, she was already gone. If the story had ended at tragedy, authorities might have closed it as a suicide driven by years of abuse. But the story didn't end there. Junior kept watching, and then he talked. While the family tried to revive their daughter and shouted for help, the tablet continued streaming. Somewhere across the city, possibly in another province, Junior observed the aftermath without intervening. When detectives finally unplugged the device and pulled it from the tripod, the connection severed for the first time since the previous day. The recordings became evidence, and prosecutors would later use a new phrase to define his role: remote incitement. The arrest came swiftly, not because the justice system finally recognized his violence, but because he broke the restraining order in a way no one could ignore. Security footage from December 30th clearly showed him violating the house arrest boundaries, dropping her at the gate and driving away. His legal team tried to dispute the footage, claimed the man in the video wasn't him, that the truck belonged to someone else, that the image quality was insufficient. The court disagreed. Then came the moment that pushed the system past its threshold of tolerance. During the funeral, while her family buried their daughter, Junior appeared at the cemetery. Eyewitnesses confirmed it. House arrest, restraining order, law enforcement restrictions, none of it mattered to him. He waved through them as if they were caution tape tied to a child's playground. After that, the court dismissed the old leniencies. No more house arrest, no more voluntary compliance. He was taken into custody and held indefinitely while prosecutors built their case. Investigators began layering the timeline not as a domestic dispute, but as a captivity model. They traced Mexico, they traced Ecuador, they traced the pandemic, they traced the device, they traced every report the family had filed, 6 complaints in total. They traced the digital surveillance logs, GPS pings, and hours of video. They traced the break-ins, the stalking at 3 a.m., the weapons, the assault on Carlos, the orbital fracture, the threats against both parents, the tablet rules, the alarms, the forced isolation, the injuries from December 30th. Piece by piece, the prosecution constructed a picture that no longer resembled a romance gone wrong, but something closer to a hostage scenario that had simply replaced chains with software and locks with a camera feed. Digital captivity was the term that journalists eventually adopted. The courts preferred psychological coercion, but families who survived similar dynamics recognized it instantly. Control reinforced with surveillance, punishment enforced through proximity, obedience extracted through threat. As the case moved into public view, Argentina erupted with outrage. Domestic violence advocates flooded social platforms with comparisons to femicide cases where the warning signs had been ignored until the morgue was involved. Legal analysts questioned why a professional athlete under house arrest, with documented violence complaints and a restraining order, was not fitted with an electronic monitoring device. Former prosecutors labeled the case a system failure. Activists called it predictable. The Ayala family called it preventable. Junior, for his part, made no public apology. No public denial either, only the same unnerving composure he'd displayed in his voice messages. A man who seemed less concerned about the legal consequences than about the loss of control over his favorite object, the screen that once let him monitor her life from a distance. The charges kept mounting: incitement to self-harm, repeated violent threats, prolonged psychological coercion, domestic aggression, stalking, injuries leading to disability in Carlos' case, and a potential homicide enhancement still under review. Prosecutors also opened a separate investigation concerning what happened on December 30th, the day she returned from his vehicle in pain and struggling to breathe. If those injuries are linked to internal trauma, the case could shift again, widening from psychological incitement to direct causation. In the courthouse halls, journalists speculated about sentencing, but the family didn't care about numbers. They cared about precedent. They wanted a legal framework that acknowledged what happened to their daughter, not as a tragedy of love, but as a blueprint of technological subjugation. They wanted the court to recognize that stalking no longer always hides in alleyways, that abuse no longer always strikes with fists, and that captivity no longer always requires a locked door. Cases like this don't end with arrests. They linger inside courtrooms, inside families, inside headlines, and inside legal systems that suddenly realize they weren't built for the kind of violence that doesn't require physical proximity. For Argentina, the Ayala case became exactly that, a mirror. The country is no stranger to femicide statistics or domestic abuse cases that end with photographs, candles, and a march through the Capitol. But this case was different in the architecture of its control. No padlocks, no captivity rooms, no hostage notes, and the coerced obedience traveled through fiber optics and Wi-Fi. It forced prosecutors to confront a reality that criminal law has been slow to recognize. You don't need to be in the room to kill someone. You only need to dominate the room. Public opinion broke swiftly against Junior. Clubs dissolved his contracts within days. Sports networks erased commentary segments featuring him. His former teammates issued statements that sounded less like solidarity and more like retroactive distance. None wanted to be attached to a case that read like the pilot episode of a psychological thriller. The image of a professional athlete, wealthy, adored, and globally mobile, using surveillance systems to dismantle a woman's autonomy, had a chilling effect on his entire sport. For the first time in his life, the spotlight wasn't currency, it was evidence. Meanwhile, lawyers on both sides strategized in parallel. Junior's team argued that what happened in that bedroom was suicide, not homicide. That although his behavior was immoral, it did not meet the threshold of legal causation. Prosecutors responded with a different framing, one that echoed across court filings like a thesis: control can kill, and when control becomes total, there is no meaningful distinction between a hand pushing and a threat forcing. They cited the voice notes. They cited the forensic timeline. They cited the 3 a.m. visits, the stalking, the weapons, the assault that permanently damaged Carlos's vision, the surveillance, the tablet that broadcast a death in real time while he listened to her parents call her name from the next room. But beyond the legal logic lay something that courts rarely know what to do with: the aftermath of the people left alive. Carlos and Cecilia aged rapidly in the months that followed. Trauma compresses time. It turns parents into archivists, saving screenshots, data logs, videos, messages, police reports, doctor evaluations, photos of injuries, copies of medical scans, restraining order denials, and each complaint stamped with dates that now read like countdown markers. They didn't just want punishment, they wanted recognition. They wanted someone with authority to acknowledge that they had reported this man 6 times, and that 6 times proved insufficient. Their home in Almirante Brown became half sanctuary, half evidence vault. Newspapers came and went, activists offered support, psychologists visited, but the device that once monitored every corner of the house had left a ghost. Rooms that once felt familiar now felt like crime scenes waiting for expert analysis. As the investigation expanded, it metastasized into a broader question for Argentina's justice system. How do you legislate against digital captivity? How do you quantify coercion transmitted through a screen? And what happens when physical distance does not diminish violence, but enhances it? Legal scholars began speaking about the case on talk shows and panel programs. Some argued the law needed an entirely new category, neither suicide nor homicide, but a hybrid involving psychological compulsion and remote threat. Others insisted homicide frameworks already contained the necessary language, provided prosecutors were willing to stretch interpretation to match modern tactics. Domestic violence groups, however, cut through the theory with blunt clarity. If someone dies because someone else wanted them dead, the mechanism is irrelevant. The public seemed to agree. The marches that followed weren't mourning rituals, they were indictments. Posters showed the tripod, the tablet, the police reports, side-by-side images of a smiling athlete and a young woman in academic robes. The contrast did the talking. Junior's career evaporated with little ceremony. Coaches stopped discussing him. Clubs scrubbed his name from promotional material. The sports world, which once elevated him for his speed and precision, now avoided him for the same reason predators avoid spotlights. Fame became a liability, proof that privilege can be both shield and weapon. Meanwhile, investigators dug into one final loose thread: December 30th, the security footage, the vehicle, the breathing problems, the pain. If internal injuries tied those symptoms directly to his last physical encounter with her, the case could evolve yet again, tightening the legal frame from psychological coercion to causation before death. For now, that report remains sealed, and prosecutors refuse to comment, which tells its own story. But perhaps the most revealing element of this case is not what happened, but how long it was allowed to happen. 5 years, 2 countries, 3 jurisdictions, multiple complaints, a restraining order, a house arrest without surveillance, a series of warnings that accumulated like storm clouds until someone had to die before anyone believed the forecast. Annabelia's story will likely be taught in law schools, not because she was the first to endure digital captivity, but because she was the first whose captivity was documented in real time through the lens of the very device that sustained it. Technology didn't just enable the abuse, it preserved it. In the final pages of the case file, after all the testimonies and police reports and forensic diagrams, a single sentence written by an investigator stands out: "She never stopped loving her parents. That is why she complied." It is a devastating line because it dismantles the final defense of her abuser, the claim that death was voluntary. Voluntary acts do not require threats against the people you would die to protect. And so the tragedy ends where it began. Not with fireworks or countdowns or New Year toasts, but with a locked bedroom door and a screen that refused to look away. A young woman trapped not in a room, but in a signal. A man who mistook domination for affection. And a family who learned too late that in the age of digital violence, a house can be invaded without anyone crossing the threshold. Control doesn't always need hands. Sometimes it only needs eyes. And in this case, those eyes watched everything.